In the summer of '67, riots broke out in Detroit, leaving death and destruction in its wake. As Detroit burned, the city of Flint was on a low simmer.
50 years later, ABC 12's Don Jones tells us how a controversial decision by a young prosecutor kept Flint from going up in flames.
The year was 1967. America was in the midst of a long civil rights movement. Blacks were fighting for rights equal to those of whites in employment, housing, and education.
They were very turbulent times.
The movement had some successes that year. Thurgood Marshall was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. That same year, the court delivered a victory to interracial marriage, declaring it constitutional. But even with those gains, the bigger issues of race and equality consumed the nation. In July of '67, the tale of two Americas, one black and one white, played out on the streets of cities all across the country.
The frustration level in Black America in 1967 manifested itself during the 60s with Watts, with Detroit, and other urban areas that literally blew up out of frustration.
All these police, every time you see one of them, he gonna stop a brother. He don't never stop no white. That's why we out here riding, and we gonna keep on riding.
In the early morning hours of Sunday, July 23rd, several white Detroit police officers raided an after-hours club in the black community.
They started pushing people around. Fights started, then gunshots, and then all hell broke loose.
It sparked 5 days of civil unrest. Sam Riddle was a young soldier from Flint. He remembers landing at Detroit Metro Airport during the height of the riots.
Being delayed by a Middle Eastern war, the 6-day war, and then suddenly returning to Michigan, Detroit Metro Airport from Turkey, where another war of sorts is breaking loose in the streets of Detroit.
As Detroit was burning and the death toll rising, officials in the city of Flint were watching and holding their breath. Bob Leonard was the Genesee County prosecutor.
Continuous confrontation between the police department and the black community, and I'm starting to think, man, that's a microcosm of Flint. We had one black police officer and about 250, 300 police officers.
Former Sheriff Joe Wilson was one of those officers. He remembers it being a very tense time in Flint.
Everybody was concerned. It was national news, it was local news, and we were wondering when's it going to hit here and if it's going to hit here.
Sure enough, by Monday night, the first fires broke out. Police arrest more than 100 men.
One white, 101 black.
What they were doing was nothing more than walking down the street, a lot of loud talk, a lot of threats, a lot of yelling, but they sat down in the street. A sergeant came in and he had some words and said, we're going to start arresting, and sure enough, we started arresting.
Willie Nolden, also known as Soki, owned a local club. He was one of the ones arrested. He's now deceased, but in a 2007 taping of the Bob Leonard Show, he described the conditions.
They're hot in that little city lockup area. That's where we were. Now, if anybody's ever been in the city lockup, figure 110 people in there with the windows closed in July. That's what was going on.
The city was on edge. The afternoon following the arrest, concerned leaders, both black and white, held a meeting.
There stands all the public officials, the 5 General Motor managers of the plants in Flint, all concerned about the plants being burned down.
They had a plan. They wanted the prosecutor to release the black men arrested the night before.
I says, are you crazy? I'm not going to release 101.
Leonard says they talked to him for about an hour, finally convincing him that those men were the only hope to save Flint from burning. It was a gamble, but he agreed.
And I can still remember getting in my car and going back to my office and said, what the hell did I just agree to? I must be crazy. I knew the city was going to come down on me, that at least the white population, for doing this.
It was disbelief when we heard that they're going to let them out. That didn't happen. Then it turned from disbelief into hatred. I mean, among the police officers. I
walked into Tom Bell, who was the sheriff. I says, you know, all those young men, black men that we had that were arrested, release them.
He was criticized by some law and order types, but the community, majority Flint, black Flint, embraced him.
The men were released, including Soki.
He was our key guy. He was the head guy. And the group, he was the leader. They would do what he wanted done.
The greatest demand at the time was saving the city from destruction. Leonard remembers what Soki said to him upon leaving jail.
Bob Leonard, I told you that we would keep the peace in Flint. We'd work on it, and I'm still going to do that and keep my promise.
As rioting in Detroit intensified,
the whole damn city's burning up.
Soki and the other 100 men took to the streets of Flint to encourage peace.
Up and down the street, little gangs, they'd walk in and talk to them and get them to cool it. They were being provoked, but they held their cool all the way through it.
For the prosecutor, it was a lucky roll of the dice. His gamble paid off.
These kids did what they promised to do, and they were the reason we didn't have any kind of injuries or anything in the city.
It didn't go unnoticed.
All the sociologists and psychologists came to Flint to find out how we did it without any trouble, because cities were burning up all over the country.
In Detroit, the rioting lasted 5 days. 43 died, more than 1,000 were injured, and entire neighborhoods were destroyed. As we approach the 50th anniversary of this deadly unrest, witnesses to this turbulent time believe, sadly, things are not much better.
In 2017, 50 years later, Detroit remains the most segregated city in America, bar none.